I said, if you hang out with me, you better expect some crazy brokenness.
We got first and last names of 6 witches that are in our church.
For years, Greg Locke built his reputation exposing what he called evil inside the church. He accused famous pastors of horrible crimes, claimed witches had invaded his congregation.
I'm glad we got good security around here. It's the wrong place to be messing around, reaching in your pocket of this house. I can tell you that right now. You hear me? It's the wrong place.
Said demons were controlling people in America.
You so much as cough wrong, and I'll expose you in front of everybody in this tent, you stinking witch.
Millions watched him. Some believed he was telling the truth. Others believed he was losing control. But in 2026, the man who built his platform on certainty suddenly admitted something shocking. He had no proof. After years of explosive accusations against major televangelists, Greg Locke publicly walked back some of his biggest claims. And suddenly, people began asking a different question. Not whether Greg Locke was exposing corruption, but whether the controversy had consumed him. Because this wasn't just the story of an internet pastor. This was the story of a man who went from small-town preacher to one of the most controversial religious figures in America. A man whose sermons became political rallies, whose church became a battlefield, whose message became darker with every year. Then came the witch accusations, the exorcisms, the public scandals, the conspiracy theories. And somewhere in the middle of it all, people stopped asking whether Greg Locke was dangerous and started asking what happens to him. Because behind the screaming sermons and viral clips, this story was becoming something much stranger and much darker. Long before the headlines and controversies, Greg Locke was just another preacher trying to build a church. He came from a difficult background and often spoke about hardship in his early life. That struggle became part of his image. He didn't sound polished. He didn't preach like a television pastor. He sounded angry, direct, personal. And for many people, that made him feel real. His church, Global Vision Bible Church in Tennessee, started small, but Locke understood something most pastors didn't. The internet rewarded emotion. The louder the sermon, the faster it spread. Soon, clips of Greg Locke shouting about politics, culture, and religion were exploding online. His Facebook audience grew into the millions. Supporters saw him as fearless, a pastor willing to say things others were too afraid to say. He attacked mainstream churches, called out hypocrisy, spoke directly to frustrated Christians who felt ignored by religious leaders. And it worked. His sermons spread far beyond Tennessee. People traveled across states to hear him preach. But even early on, there were warning signs. The sermons weren't just emotional anymore. They were becoming confrontational. Greg Locke wasn't simply preaching to his audience. He was preparing them for a fight. And as his influence grew, so did the intensity of his message. By the late 2019, Greg Locke was no longer just a local pastor. He had become a national figure. His sermons mixed religion with politics, faith with outrage, preaching with performance. And during the COVID era, his audience exploded. Locke openly attacked mask mandates, dismissed public health warnings, and mocked parts of the pandemic response. At one point, he said people wearing masks would not be welcome at his church. The clips went viral almost instantly. To critics, he sounded reckless. To supporters, he sounded brave. That division only made him bigger. The more outrage he created, the more attention he received. Soon, Greg Locke became deeply connected to America's growing culture war movement. He aligned himself closely with Donald Trump supporters, repeated election fraud claims, and appeared alongside controversial political and religious figures. His church transformed into something larger than a ministry. It became a movement. Crowds packed his events. People waved political flags during sermons. The line between church gathering and political rally started disappearing. But something else was happening too. The message was becoming darker. The sermons focused less on hope and more on enemies. Enemies in government, enemies in culture, enemies inside the church. And according to Greg Locke, those enemies weren't just political. Some of them were demonic. And this is where the story began taking a much stranger turn. As Greg Locke's influence grew online, his personal life was beginning to fall apart. In 2018, he announced he was divorcing his wife, Melissa, after more than 20 years of marriage. The news shocked many people inside his church. But the controversy became much bigger when Greg Locke later married Ty McGee, a church assistant who had worked closely with him. Almost immediately, rumors exploded online. Critics accused Locke of having an inappropriate relationship before the divorce. He denied the accusations publicly, repeatedly, but the timing raised questions, and those questions didn't go away. Then things became even more uncomfortable. Greg Locke began speaking publicly about Melissa's mental health struggles. He claimed she had spent time in treatment facilities and women's shelters. Some supporters defended him. Others felt he had crossed a line. Because this no longer felt like church controversy. It felt deeply personal. Former supporters began leaving the ministry. Critics accused Locke of emotional manipulation. Others claimed the church environment had become controlling and hostile. And behind the scenes, more former members began speaking out. Some described the church as fear-driven. Others accused Locke of humiliating people publicly. But Greg Locke wasn't backing away. If anything, he became more intense. The sermons grew louder, the warnings became darker. And soon, Greg Locke would make claims so bizarre that even longtime supporters struggled to defend them. In early 2022, Greg Locke delivered a sermon that pushed his ministry into national headlines. He claimed witches had infiltrated his church. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, real witches. According to Locke, demons had revealed their identities to him. He warned that people inside his congregation were secretly practicing witchcraft. The clip spread across the internet almost instantly. For some viewers, it looked absurd. For others, it looked dangerous. But the controversy didn't stop there. Greg Locke became increasingly obsessed with spiritual warfare and exorcisms. His church started hosting deliverance services focused on casting demons out of people. The sermons became filled with talk about curses, possession, spiritual attacks, hidden demonic influence. Then came another backlash. Locke made comments suggesting conditions like autism and mental illness could be linked to demonic oppression. Mental health advocates condemned the remarks. Even many Christians distanced themselves. But Greg Locke doubled down. Then came the book burnings. His church organized events where people threw Harry Potter books, occult objects, and other items into fires. Critics compared the scenes to something out of another era. And by now, the internet had become obsessed with Greg Locke. Every sermon felt more unpredictable than the last. Every clip raised the same question. Was this still a church, or had it become something else entirely? As Greg Locke's audience grew larger, his enemies list grew larger too. He attacked politicians, media outlets, doctors, pastors, even other Christians. Anyone who disagreed with him quickly became part of the problem. Locke also became heavily tied to conspiracy-driven religious movements during and after the 2020 election. He promoted claims of election fraud, appeared at events connected to the Reawaken America movement, and encouraged supporters to distrust major institutions. Critics warned that his sermons were becoming increasingly extreme. Some Christian leaders publicly distanced themselves. Others accused him of spreading fear and paranoia. Former church members began describing the ministry in darker terms. They claimed disagreement wasn't tolerated, that critics were publicly shamed, that fear became a tool of control. Some even described the environment as spiritually abusive. Meanwhile, Greg Locke continued escalating his rhetoric online. Then came one of the strangest reversals of his career. Years earlier, Locke had strongly criticized televangelist Benny Hinn. He even built part of his image around attacking prosperity gospel preachers. But later, he publicly apologized to Hinn and praised him. To critics, it looked inconsistent. To supporters, it looked like spiritual growth. But before people could fully process that shift, Greg Locke made accusations so explosive that they would eventually threaten his credibility forever. Because this time, he wasn't accusing anonymous enemies. He was accusing some of the most famous pastors in America. At the height of his influence, Greg Locke made some of the biggest claims of his entire career. He accused famous televangelists Joel Osteen and Kenneth Copeland of being connected to horrific crimes. The accusations spread rapidly online. Locke suggested there was hidden corruption inside powerful churches. He spoke with certainty, confidence, urgency, and millions listened. For supporters, Greg Locke sounded like a man exposing dangerous secrets, but critics immediately demanded evidence, and for years the controversy followed him. Then in 2026, everything changed. Greg Locke publicly walked back parts of the accusations. He admitted he did not personally have proof for the explosive claims he had repeated. One statement shocked even longtime supporters. Locke said he had been used as an amplifier. That single phrase changed the entire story, because suddenly people began asking, if Greg Locke didn't have proof, why did he speak with so much certainty? The man who built his platform exposing deception was now being accused of spreading it, and the backlash was immediate. Critics said the recantation proved he had become reckless. Others argued that he damaged real people with public accusations. Even some supporters struggled to defend him, because this wasn't just another controversial sermon anymore. This was credibility. And once credibility begins collapsing publicly, it rarely stops there. Around the same time, Greg Locke faced more legal and public scrutiny. He was arrested in Tennessee for driving with a suspended license. The incident itself was minor, but symbolically, it added to the growing image of disorder surrounding his ministry. Then came another disturbing event. Locke's home was hit by gunfire during a frightening incident involving dozens of shell casings. Authorities later connected the situation to a personal dispute involving a family member rather than church politics, but online speculation exploded. By this point, Greg Locke's story no longer felt like a pastor's rise. It felt like a public unraveling, and the emotional cost of that unraveling was about to become painfully real. By 2026, Greg Locke had become one of the most polarizing religious figures on the internet. To supporters, he was still a truth-teller under attack. To critics, he had become a symbol of what happens when outrage, politics, and religion completely merge together. But inside the ministry, the pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Former followers continued sharing stories about fear, manipulation, and emotional control. Others defended the church fiercely. The division only grew deeper. Greg Locke kept preaching, kept traveling, kept fighting online, but something had changed. The confidence that once made him look fearless now looked different to many viewers, more defensive, more unstable, and even people who once admired him started questioning whether the constant outrage had gone too far. Still, Greg Locke remained influential. His audience stayed loyal, his sermons still spread online, and controversy continued fueling attention. But behind the scenes, a much more personal tragedy was unfolding that had nothing to do with politics or witchcraft or internet fame. It involved his family. Reports later revealed that Greg Locke's son, Evan, had struggled with addiction for years. The situation was deeply painful and largely hidden from public view. Then came devastating news. Evan Locke died following a drug overdose. And suddenly, the loud internet battles around Greg Locke faded into the background. Because this time, the story wasn't about controversy. It was about loss. The death of Greg Locke's son changed the emotional tone surrounding his story. Even some of his harshest critics expressed sympathy, because beyond the viral clips and public scandals, there was still a family dealing with grief. And for the first time in years, many people saw Greg Locke differently, not as a political figure, not as an internet celebrity, but as a father. Addiction had reportedly affected Evan Locke for a long time. The struggle was ongoing, complicated, painful, and tragedies like that rarely happen in isolation. They leave emotional damage everywhere. By this point, Greg Locke's ministry had already survived years of chaos, public backlash, church division, conspiracy